Our next speaker is Laura Ahern, the Executive Director of the Friends of Megan's Law and the Crime Victims Center. Laura is a strong voice for sexually victimized children and an expert on sexual abuse prevention and management of Megan's Law and services for victims of violent crime. Laura?
Thank you. Thank you. It's Laura Ahern, Executive Director of Parents for Megan's Law. I just wanted to make it, we were close. We are friends too, though. Imagine how it must feel when the law that is intended to protect our most vulnerable and our innocent is actually being used to shield the guilty. Because that's exactly what's happening. First, I have to go on the record, speaking of shielding, I have to go on the record strongly opposing Assemblyman Lopez's bill. Lawmakers are elected to represent us in the community, not to represent individuals and organizations who boldly took calculating actions to hide crimes. Hide them. Specifically, the sexual victimization of children. Those organizations must be accountable to the many victims whose lives they chose to significantly damage solely to protect their assets and their reputations. Have we learned anything from their actions? Those same organizations that acted above the law and facilitated the victimization of children come to our state capitol and lobby against Assemblywoman Markey's legislation. Again, to protect their assets and their reputations. The machinations of cover-up have evolved. They have evolved into a lobby of political propaganda with the same organizational agenda. Protect reputation and assets at any cost. Not only have these organizations facilitated the victimization of children, but now they're maneuvering to prevent justice from prevailing for the very crimes they covered up in the first place. Although the financial ramifications of this proposed law might be distasteful, specifically to insurers of organizations that chose not to protect the innocents, a one-year window for the filing of civil actions is at the very least fair and just. And after everything these organizations have done to cover up the victimization of children, you would hope a conscience would prevail and that they would support Assemblywoman Markey's legislation. We certainly do. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Our next speaker, and I don't know if she's here, is Sister Sally here?
Yes, I'm right here.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sister. Our next speaker is Sister Sally Butler, a Dominican sister who 20 years ago developed a highly praised organization for young women, Protect Teen Aid and Family Services. She is now retired, but Sister Sally has a perspective on the subject of child sexual abuse as a result of experiences in her local diocese. Sister Sally.
Good morning. As Marge mentioned, I am a Dominican sister from Brooklyn. I've lived and worked with families in the Fort Greene housing projects for 40 years. I will be very brief because better people than I have covered the facts. I just want to emphasize one point. I'm here because in 1993, I discovered quite by accident that 20 years before, 3 priests with whom 2 other sisters and I worked in a local parish were in reality pedophiles. One of their many victims, all very poor little boys from fatherless homes in the projects. One of them was my own foster son, Carlos Cruz. When Ramona Cruz was dying, she gave her son to me. And I arranged for him to live in that rectory with those 3 priests. So for the past 16 years, I have tried to atone. I've tried to find some semblance of justice for these children. We estimate 20 to 25 at least, but with no success at all. The statute of limitations made that impossible. None of the men has ever received help or been given the chance to tell his story. And I have noticed that victims who are people of color have seldom reported the crime, mainly because they don't trust the church or the criminal justice system. I'm here to focus attention on an issue which is present in all our major religions, the process of sin and the forgiveness of sin. This is my point. In my Roman Catholic tradition, the process begins with the sinners, and we're all sinners, with the sinner's admission of guilt. Now, I'd like to point out that the molestation of small children is not an indiscretion, as has been mentioned by bishops. It's not an indiscretion by any means. It is a mortal sin in our tradition. Mortal meaning it kills. It kills the child, the spirit of the child. Now, following this admission of guilt, the sinner must express remorse, and that has been done occasionally. But before absolution can be granted, the sinner is required to make restitution. Without this most important component, there is no forgiveness. All Catholics, young and old, know this. This isn't some new age idea. This has been going on for centuries. The little boys I remember were bright, energetic, and hopeful. Today, those whom I could find are struggling with addictions, AIDS, they're in prison or they're homeless, and in many cases, their families don't know where they are. To this day, they're all dealing every day with panic attacks, sleep disorders, and crippling depression. If those people who allowed the children to be harmed are truly sorry, as they have said they are, then restitution must be made. Those of you who have been elected to public office have a sacred responsibility. We look to you to protect our community, especially its vulnerable members. The Markey bill will help us bring this sad chapter in our recent history to a just conclusion.